Alrighty, and moving right along, let's look at part three of Women in Nazi Germany. And so here we're going to look at the actual policies that were implemented. Once again, for the red questions, pause and consider and try to incorporate your understanding from previous things to develop robust explanations. You don't have to stop and answer, but just give yourself a bit of time to think about this. Our objectives for this video is to know these policies and then also to analyze the impact of those policies and their success. Now, keep in mind, again, continuity and change. So here we're looking at the policies towards women. We can see here an image of a group of young girls parading, giving the Hitler salute and singing. And just one of those things to really kind of consider is when you are creating an ideologically based state, you start young because these are your future. If you shape them, then you don't have to fight them later on. So let's start taking a look at the policies enacted by the Nazi regime that directly affected women. The goal here was to increase pure German births. This fits into the overall Nazi ideology. So remember not to just forget things, but to carry it forward so that you have a more robust, I'm really loving that word, answer. So one of the things is that I've divided it into 1933 to 39 and then also 39 to 45. Once again, remember, 33 to 39 covers the HL topic. But if you want to look at paper 2 topic, that covers the entirety, so 33 to 35. So let's get started. So from 1933 to 39, the policies included financial incentives. What they basically did was provided marriage loans to couples. And there would then therefore be a 25% reduction in the loan for every child. So it was essentially interest-free, 1% interest. They had to pay 1% of the loan per month. But each kid you produce, whoop, whoop, knocked a whole 25% off of the principal. There was also improved maternity services. So the idea is helping to increase the numbers of children who would survive and also mothers. They had recuperation homes and help with newborns, so places that women could go after they gave birth that would help them. The state also subsidized pre- and postnatal care to help to provide for healthy births. There was healthy amount of propaganda that it looked to improve the status and the self-esteem of mothers and housewives. And so one of the things that happened is to combat the fact that they are now taking away from women those opportunities for status outside of the home. So then they would shore up the status of those who remained at home. There were penalties for not producing children. There were higher taxes on childless couples, and the promotion at work was based on the number of children you had. So if the husband, for example, had especially a civil service job, they would not be promoted. They could potentially be demoted for being childless. And the more children you had, then, maybe you increase your chances of rising up in the organization. And so the civil service is directly under government control, and they did that there. And they also encouraged private industry to do the same thing. They limited access to family planning, so there were penalties on abortion and restrictions on contraceptives and information about family planning. And then the other thing was sterilization. There was mandatory sterilization of people deemed to be undesirable, and this was largely those who were born with mental or physical disabilities. So if you lost an arm in the war, you are a hero. If you were born without an arm, then they kind of want to make sure that you do not perpetuate those faulty genes. So it was all part of the program of eugenics. Plus, from 1939 to 1945, you have the Lebensborn program. My German be real good, yo. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. Essentially, these were brothels for SS. So they were stocked with women who had desirable genes, who looked Aryan, and they were encouraged to have children with these SS soldiers. There was the encouragement of births outside of marriage, primarily through the Lebensborn program. And this, of course, the effects were from 1933 to 1939, the birth rate rose slowly. So there was an increase, but it was quite slow. But then after 1939, this declined. And what we have here is an image of women who are part of the Lebensborn program. So altogether in Germany, about 11,000 children were born from these Lebensborn programs. And Lebensborn means the spring of life. And they also implemented this program in places like Norway, the Scandinavian countries, which were considered to have desirable genes. And the other thing here, we have the awards, that propaganda trying to increase the status of women, of mothers, and housewives. So you have here, this was the honor cross of German motherhood. And on the right, you see women proudly wearing the cross. And basically, this was modeled on military crosses given to men. The idea, of course, was the differing spheres in developing a awesome Germany. So the men got military crosses for their manly might, and the women got similar, but all about having them babies. You got a Bronze Star for 4 to 5 kids, a Silver Star for 6 to 7 kids, and a Gold Star if you had 8 or more babies. So another major goal was to increase suitable marriages, and this would have been connected to the whole suitable birth thing as well. So from 1930 to 39, that took the form of the marriage loan, as spoken about previously. It went hand in hand with increasing the number of births. And so this loan was only available if the woman was unemployed. So the woman, if she had been working outside of the home, then the couple would only be able to get this loan if she gave up her job and became a full-time housewife. In 1937, the marriage loan was amended and extended to women who also work, when previously you could only get that if the woman worked. You could only get the marriage loan if the husband earned below a certain threshold. So I guess maybe they saw that it wasn't being as fruitful as they thought, so it was amended. In 1935, you have the passage of the marriage law, and it required a certificate of fitness to marry. So this was, you had to both be Aryan, and you had to provide evidence of this. And the idea here is you could not marry other people. And in 1935, you have the blood protection law as well. And this was, in addition to requiring the fitness certificate, now marriages to unsuitable races were forbidden. And this included Jews, blacks, and gypsies. Again, it's connected to the previous one of increasing the German births. And then finally, you have the 1938 in 1938, the marriage law was amended to allow for divorce. So unlike in other places where divorce was actually something that provided women with greater freedom, the purpose of this allowing of divorce was really so that if people were infertile with each other, then they could be encouraged to divorce each other and find somebody else that they could be fertile with. Plus, so from 1939 to 45, In 1941, couples who were found living together, if their marriage has been banned, so for example, if both did not pass the fitness to marry, or they were trying to marry somebody who was in one of the forbidden races, if they were found to still be living with that person, then they would be sent to concentration camps. And the overall effect of this, in 1932, you had 500,000 marriages. In 1934, there were 740,000 marriages. And in 1938, there was a big spike in divorce. So, another goal that directly impacted women was to develop healthy Germans. And so from 1933 to 1939, the government implemented programs like the NSVP, that is the National Socialist Welfare Organization. And this was used to provide milk to families and food and taking care of older people. So this was basically to be the primary social welfare organization of the state. The other thing that they did was they increased the number of health offices, especially in rural areas. They worked on improving sanitation. The idea, of course, is to reduce the number of people who became ill from waterborne diseases, thereby keeping people healthy. There was also a focus on preventative medicine, that is trying to take care of illnesses before they got worse. And so this was state-sponsored healthcare. And there was genetic and racial care, and I'm sure you can have an idea of the form that this took. Now, from 1939 to 45, there was a focus on improving childcare facilities. So, obviously, think about the context of the time, why they might be improving childcare facilities at this time. So, this was primarily for working mothers. And they also included harvest kindergarten for agricultural workers. And the effects of this, keep in mind the time frame, infant mortality fell significantly. So from 1933, we have 7.7%. So that is 7.7% of the babies born alive that year died before the age of 5. And then from 1930, but at 1936, the figure we have is 6.6. So you see a reduction in the infant mortality. Here we have an image of dental health care being provided by the NSVP for students. They went into schools and did a lot of teaching about healthcare, especially to girls, about properly taking care of children and themselves and being healthy. And that is also one of the reasons why they also provided a lot of after school or leisure activities that focused on athletics for both boys and girls to maintain that physical health. One of the major goals of the regime was to prepare women for their proper role, and in order to do that, you had to restrict some of their opportunities. So from 1933 to 39, the policies included limiting university enrollment of women to 10%. So no university could have more than 10% of its student body be female. And between 1939 and 45, these restrictions were dropped, though, because of the increased demand for well-educated workers. And the impacts of this, basically, you have a significant reduction of the numbers of women at universities until World War II. Another goal was to reduce female employment. So from 33 to 39, this is what they did. In 1933, women in top civil service and medical jobs were dismissed, so they were fired from their jobs. In 1936, they passed a ban preventing women from being judges and lawyers. Now, one of the things to consider here is these policies were aimed at government-controlled institutions, essentially. But from 39 to 45, we have in 1939 compulsory agricultural labor service. This was especially for women who were under the age of 25 and unmarried. And then women were very much encouraged to support the war effort in various ways. This included, of course, volunteering in certain organizations, as well as working in things like factories or secretarial jobs, etc. And then from 1942 onwards, those between the ages of 17 and 45 were told to register for work, and then they were slotted into the positions that the government needed them to be in. And the impacts of this was basically an increased number of women employed. We'll look at the evidence and the data in class, but we actually have an increased number of women working outside the home. Think about the context, what's going to affect this. And then when we get to World War II, this is an even higher number. All right, you guys, wait for it. My amazing German pronunciation is coming up. So another goal was to organize women and incorporate them into the Volksgemeinschaft. You're welcome. So from 30 through 39, the main policy of this was no female Nazi members were allowed in the Reichstag. So this was reversing some of the gains that had been made during Weimar. And you have the creation of the NSF. And the NSF was an umbrella organization that coordinated the existing women's organizations to bring them in line with official Nazi ideology. So, for example, some of the women's organizations that had been in place prior to the Nazi regime, this collated them all together and made sure they were teaching people right. The NSF also had the Reichs Mother Service, and this trained housewives. Whoop, whoop. That's right. Learn how to be a good housewife, as well as midwives. These are people who help to deliver babies. Now, the DFW was set up to develop an elite of women committed to Nazi ideology. So this would basically be the vanguard of the Nazi Party, and this would help to spread the word to other women. It also trained women in the domestic arts like cooking and sewing and cleaning. I'm not sure what else these arts are, but basically that's it. And then when we get to 39 to 45, the policy was basically to support the war effort. So this included collecting clothes for women, for people on the front, further expansion of work with the welfare organization to help take care of women whose husbands were off fighting, and providing care for children so women could go to work. And the impacts of this was essentially we have an increased participation in Nazi bodies. One of the things we'll look at a little bit later on are some of the various organizations that existed. So this was a way of pulling women to be further involved with the state and in what the state needed them to be. And here we have an image of a typical after-school activity for members of the League of German Girls. And so what they did is they took children from large families and took care of them. So in this way, they would kind of provide a support service for mothers with a lot of children to care for, to kind of give them a break. But at the same time, this would be training them on how to take care of children. So let's take a look at Nazi organizations for women. Guys, this is not meant to be a list to memorize, but kind of a look at some of the themes of the state's involvement in women's lives. So started off young, so you have the young girls for ages 10 to 14, and this was the female version of the Hitler Youth. And this is where you began the teaching of important housewife skills like cooking, cleaning, etc. You have the League of German Girls, and on the right, you can see their uniform and what they were supposed to look like. And this was from ages 14 to 18. Again, kind of like a deeper uh, examination of the female arts. You have Faith and Beauty, the NSF, the National Socialist Women's Organization. Again, this was essentially the social welfare of the state, and this included the Reich's Mother Service, as stated previously, that helped to deliver babies and trained housewives. You have the German Women's Enterprise, and this again was set up to help shape women to believe in the Nazi ideology, and also provided more training in the domestic arts. So the idea here is for the young girls and the League of German Girls, you catch them when they're young and start instilling it. But for the DFW, we have people who are already adults, yet have not developed the skills to be an ideal German woman, and this was that was the purpose, essentially, of the DFW. We have the RAD and the DAF. Now, maybe y'all might want to refer to notes on the domestic and economic policies for more specifics of these, but we have the RAD as the Reich Labor Service, and each one of these had a women's section. And the Reich's Labor Service worked to militarize the workforce and indoctrinate. And until 1939, this was voluntary for women. And the DAF was the German Labor Front, and this replaced the trade unions, and every worker had to be a member. So there were still women in the workforce, and they had to be a member of this. And this is, the strength through joy, and the leisure activities, as well as organizing what the workday was going to look like, and so on and so forth. And then we spoke about previously the NSV, the National Welfare Organization. And basically, the goal here was to attempt to meet the needs of the community. So there was still this sort of attempt to be not socialist, because the idea is that the individual is less important than the state, and individual members need to sacrifice for the good of the community. This wasn't explicitly a women's organization, but this organization functioned because of women's labor. So about half of the women were paid, and then the rest were volunteers. So consider how this list of organizations speaks to both the Nazi view of women, the relationship between the state and the individual, and the level of totalitarianism. So just consider all of that. And finally, assess, right? So given the previous that we've spoken about, so begin to assess the effectiveness of the policies. We will talk about this in greater depth in class, but you should begin your assessment now. To what extent were the goals achieved? And considering whatever extent you think, what could have accounted for those effects? And that's it. Tune in for part 4.